In May 1940, the German Wehrmacht was executing what appeared to be the most perfect military operation in human history. The Blitzkrieg was tearing through France with such terrifying speed that the Allied High Command was in a state of total paralysis. The German panzer divisions, led by commanders like Erwin Rommel, were moving so fast that they were often miles ahead of their own supply lines, convinced that no Allied weapon could stop their momentum. But on May 21st, near the town of Arras, the invincible German machine hit a mechanical glitch that nearly derailed the entire invasion of Europe. That glitch was the Matilda II, a British infantry tank that was so heavily armored it felt like a weapon from a different era of warfare. While the Germans had prioritized speed and coordination, the British had built a slow-moving 27-ton cast-iron monster designed to walk through a hail of machine gun fire and high-explosive shells without taking a scratch. At the time, the standard German anti-tank weapon was the 37mm PAK-36. German soldiers, who had spent months training with this gun, believed it could handle anything on the battlefield. But when the Matilda IIs emerged from the smoke at Arras, the German crews were horrified to see their shells hitting the British tanks and simply bouncing off like pebbles thrown at a brick wall. The PAK-36 was so useless against the Matilda's 78mm of solid steel armor that the German crews frantically nicknamed their own weapon the Heeres Anklappgerät, the army door knocker. They were knocking on the door of the Matilda, but the British weren't letting them in. For the first time in the war, a wave of genuine panic swept through the German ranks. Rommel's legendary 7th Panzer Division, the Ghost Division, was being physically crushed by a force they couldn't damage. The Matilda II was moving at a walking pace of only 8 miles per hour, but it was an unstoppable glacier of steel. It didn't matter how well the Germans maneuvered or how accurately they fired. The Matilda just kept coming, crushing German anti-tank positions and running over their guns. This wasn't just a tactical problem, it was a psychological glitch in the German doctrine of invincibility. The German soldiers realized they were facing a machine that had fundamentally broken the rules of the Blitzkrieg. In a moment of absolute desperation, as the British tanks threatened to break through the German lines and cut off the entire Panzer spearhead, Rommel was forced to do something that defied all standard military protocol. He ordered his men to take their 88mm flak cannons, massive weapons designed strictly for shooting down high-altitude bombers, and level them horizontally at the approaching tanks. It was a suicide move of last resort, a frantic attempt to use a sledgehammer to stop a wall. This was the moment the Queen of the Desert forced the Germans to change the way they fought forever, proving that even the most perfect invasion could be brought to a standstill by a single, unkillable machine that refused to follow the script of modern war.
After the shock of Arras, the Matilda II was shipped to the scorching sands of North Africa, where it would earn the legendary title that cemented its place in history, the Queen of the Desert. In late 1940, during Operation Compass, the British were outnumbered by the Italian 10th Army by 5-1. On paper, it should have been a slaughter for the British, but the Italians were about to encounter a technical glitch in reality that they simply could not compute. The Italian anti-tank guns, primarily the 47mm Cannone da 47-32, were effectively useless against the Matilda's massive cast steel hull. During the Battle of Nibewa, a small group of Matildas spearheaded the assault on a fortified Italian camp. As the tanks rolled forward at their agonizingly slow pace of just 15 miles per hour, Italian gunners fired point-blank at the British machines. To their horror, the shells didn't just fail to penetrate, they shattered upon impact, leaving nothing but silver star-shaped marks on the Matilda's paint. The British crews inside reported hearing a constant clatter, like heavy rain on a tin roof, but otherwise they felt nothing. This invulnerability created a terrifying psychological phenomenon. Italian soldiers began to believe the Matilda was not a machine, but some kind of immortal monster. Entire divisions, thousands of men strong, began surrendering to just a handful of these tanks because they realized that nothing in their arsenal, not their rifles, their grenades, or their cannons, could stop the Queen. At the siege of Bardia and the fall of Tobruk, the Matilda II was the unstoppable tip of the spear, crushing through barbed wire and concrete bunkers, while Italian shells bounced harmlessly into the sand. The tank was powered by two separate AEC diesel engines coupled together, a design that was a logistical nightmare, but meant that if one engine was hit or failed, the tank could still limp home on the other. It was slow, it was cramped, and its tiny 2-pounder gun couldn't even fire high explosive shells to clear out infantry, but it didn't matter. The Matilda was a mobile fortress that redefined the rules of desert warfare. However, the glitch of invincibility was about to meet its nemesis. Word reached Berlin of the unkillable British tank, and Erwin Rommel, the man who had survived the Matilda at Arras, was sent to Africa with the Afrika Korps. He knew the standard German tanks, the Panzer III and IV, still couldn't reliably kill a Matilda in a head-to-head fight. To solve the problem, Rommel turned to the Hellfire Pass strategy. He began digging his massive 88mm anti-aircraft guns into the sand, hiding them until the Matildas were just a few hundred yards away. This was the moment the Queen finally met a weapon that could punch through her heart. The 88mm shells didn't bounce. They tore through the thickest armor the British had ever designed, as if it were paper. The era of the invincible tank was ending, and a desperate arms race was beginning that would eventually lead to the birth of the Tiger and the Panther. The Matilda II had single-handedly broken the Italian army and forced the Germans to reinvent their entire anti-tank doctrine, proving that in the desert, being the toughest player on the board is only a glitch that lasts until the enemy finds a bigger hammer. By 1942, the glitch of the Matilda's invincibility was rapidly fading in the face of German engineering. The arrival of the long-barreled Panzer IV and the dreaded 88mm flak gun meant that the Queen of the Desert was no longer a fortress, but a slow-moving target. In the open plains of North Africa, her top speed of just 15 miles per hour became a death sentence. But just as the Matilda was being retired from the European front, she found a second life in a theater of war that was even more brutal, the dense emerald jungles of the Pacific. While the tank was becoming obsolete against German steel, it was about to become a literal god on the battlefields of New Guinea and Borneo. The Australian army took the Matilda II into the jungle, and there the glitch returned with a vengeance. The Japanese military, unlike the Germans, lacked heavy, high-velocity anti-tank guns. Their standard weapons were small 37mm and 47mm cannons that were designed for light mobility, not for cracking thick cast steel hulls. When the Matildas rolled through the jungle brush, the Japanese soldiers were horrified to find that their shells were doing exactly what the German shells had done at Arras years earlier. They were bouncing off like pebbles. The Japanese resorted to desperate, suicidal tactics, with human mine squads jumping onto the tanks to plant satchel charges or trying to jam crowbars into the tracks. But the British had designed the Matilda with side skirts that protected the suspension, a feature that made it nearly impossible to disable in close-quarters jungle fighting. To make the machine even more terrifying, the Australians modified the Matilda into a version called the Frog. They replaced the main gun with a high-pressure flamethrower that could incinerate a reinforced bunker from 100 yards away. It became a weapon of psychological horror. The sight of a Matilda emerging from the jungle mist, completely immune to gunfire and breathing 30-foot streams of liquid fire, caused entire Japanese garrisons to break and flee in terror.
Even as the war moved toward high-tech jets and massive Tiger tanks, this obsolete machine from 1939 remained in active combat until the very last day of World War II in 1945. It outlasted almost every other tank from the early war period because its glitch was so fundamental. It was simply too tough to die. The legacy of the Matilda II isn't just about armor thickness. It's the story of a machine that forced the world to realize that speed isn't everything. It proved that a slow, stubborn, and unkillable beast could change the fate of two different continents. By the time the last Matilda was turned off, it had earned its place as the most successful infantry tank in history. The queen who refused to abdicate her throne, even when the world around her had turned to fire.